Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about Baldur's Gate 3, early impressions. I'm still in Act 1, I've only put in 25 hours so far of playtime, only 25 hours. Some games you can do in 10 hours, a dozen hours. Baldur's Gate 3 is barely getting started, and it is a very long game clearly, but it's also the kind of game that catches your interest throughout all of it. And it's not just like, oh, the main story, the big bang. No, it's all the small things that really sell this game to me. Now, I didn't really grow up playing RPGs, not in the same way that other people did. I didn't bother with the older Fallout games or Baldur's Gate 1 or 2 or Neverwinter Nights. I started with Knights of the Old Republic 1, then played Knights of the Republic 2, and then played a bunch of other BioWare games like Jade Empire, Dragon Age Origins, Mass Effect 1, 2, and then the Witcher series, Witcher 1, Witcher 2, Witcher 3, all of those kind of games. And what made games like Dragon Age Origins, Knights of the Old Republic, Mass Effect 2 special is the idea that you're entering this kind of magical world, so to speak, that really caught your interest and synced its hooks into you. Like you were hooked to play those games again and again and again. To give you some context, I played Dragon Age Origins over 9 times. The Witcher 2, a dozen times. Mass Effect 2, a dozen times. It gives you an idea of how great those games could be. In fact, Dragon Age Origins was the game that pushed me to become a content creator on YouTube. What made those games interesting wasn't just like what the games contain, it was like the kind of discussions you could have with people about the choices you make, the worlds, all of that kind of stuff. And since then, the RPGs that we've gotten haven't necessarily been on the same level. Like Cyberpunk, it was okay, but it wasn't fantastic. And I'll be honest, as someone who was a really big fan of Witcher 1 and Witcher 2, Witcher 3 for me was a major disappointment. It lacked the magic, if you will, that Witcher 1 and Witcher 2 especially did have. The choices, the characters, the consequences of those choices, the moral dilemmas, if you will. The sense that you're entering a world that was far greater than yourself. Or the dramatic storytelling of the Mass Effect games, the Mass Effect 1 and Mass Effect 2. Like, we've had some decent RPGs, like Mass Effect 3 for all the issues does have its moments, but overall it doesn't reach the same heights as the previous games. Witcher 3, good game, don't get me wrong on that, but again, doesn't reach the same heights. Dragon Age Inquisition, pretty solid, but just doesn't have that magical feeling. Baldur's Gate 3 is the first game I've played in a very, very long time that really hooked me in. Like, I'm a content creator. I play a lot of different games. I explore a lot of different worlds. And I gotta tell you, when you're doing something like this as a job, it's very rare to see a title that really catches your interest. And you're not even playing it anymore for your job or forcing yourself to play it, as has been the case in many other situations. You're playing it just for the fun of it, for the joy of it. And that certainly has been my experience with Baldur's Gate 3. Games that have been like that over the last couple of years, we can think of Elden Ring, like that was a game that I thoroughly enjoyed playing just for my own sake, or God of War. Those kind of games. Outside of that, outside of those kind of games, it has been fairly rare over a decade, really, to see a game that just mesmerizes you as a player. And that's what Baldur's Gate 3 does. You start on a Mind Flayer ship being captured and having a parasite shoved in your brain. That is certainly a way to get things started. And you then end up in a world with a bunch of companions that themselves have been kidnapped, and they also have the same parasite, and the goal, so to speak, is to find a solution to this, because if you don't, you will turn into a Mind Flayer. And I'll see what the story has in hold, but really, I haven't necessarily been so interested about the main story as I have been in exploration, talking with characters, seeing how things unfold, seeing different decisions and consequences to those decisions, actually having moral dilemmas, actually having choices that felt in some way impactful. Sure, it's probably overhyped to some extent or another, to be absolutely clear, but just to state it out loud, like spoilers, of course, but just to give you an idea, there's a decision early on, and it doesn't necessarily have to amount to much, but there's a decision where a kid did try and steal something, got caught, and is now put on quote-unquote trial, or rather person who caught them just wants to keep them in prison for a small period of time as they complete a ritual with the idol. And if you do that, if you allow them to do that, the kid will just end up dead. That was pretty brutal. In fact, there's a great deal of brutality in this game, but it does depend on your choices. Or does it? Because there's also the ability of playing a character called the Dark Urge. And the Dark Urge is, well, honestly, quite sickening and horrifying what your character ends up doing. Like, killing a squirrel with 1 foot is one thing. Brutally murdering an innocent bard who had just spent time with whom you have just spent time composing and helping her make a wonderful song that you'll listen to and really pulls at the heartstrings, and then you wake up as if in a nightmare. Like, that's how it genuinely felt. You wake up like it was from a nightmare, and you have her blood on your hands, and you realize what you've done or what your character has done without your input. Pretty damn horrifying, and honestly, in all the right ways, very compelling to see a game like this where you do have these kind of moments. Brutal, extremely brutal, but there's certainly moments that will have a major impact on you as the player. And that's really, I think, what's important with story-focused games. Like, what is the impact on you as the player? Do you care whatsoever about these characters? Do you care whatsoever about the story that's unfolding? And it's not just the major things that you should care about, it's all the minor things. Like, I've barely done anything of the major story. I've been exploring, talking with people, doing a bunch of side quests, recruiting companions, all that kind of stuff. Touched the main story very, very little. But even so, I am very much drawn towards doing a lot more exploration. And exploration, the way it's handled in this game, it's like using perception to figure out what's around you, figuring out that someone's going to try and steal money from you, or finding the secrets that are in a particular level, like jumping around a level. You have a great deal of flexibility in terms of exploration. Like, you can jump, you can explore, you can split your party and send them on different parts of the level to see what is in it and figure out all the puzzles and what you're going to face. It is quite a wonderful experience, and generally speaking, a lot of games when it comes to exploration, it does feel very simplistic. Now, I'm not necessarily too fond of the way the stats work, because like, it feels like if you don't have perception, you might as well gonna get screwed. Like, if you don't have maxed out perception, you're gonna get screwed in a lot of ways. So that's probably something I do need to respect and change about my character if I am going to succeed going forward. But what's also really interesting when it comes to exploration or the game in general is you don't just have to control your player character. Your player character is obviously the center of the game, but not the only one that matters. Like, you can take control of any of your companions and actually send them to do things. And it's quite interesting. Like, you get cinematics even. They're like, when you control those companions, they might even be the center of the cinematics. It's like, during the very first mission of the game, when you're on the Mind Flayer ship, you have to use a console to basically take control of the ship. And my player character, was busy, so he didn't show up in the cinematic. Instead, one of my companions, Shadowheart, was the main character there. And then we did transition. My main character took over, but certainly it certainly has been far different than what I've seen in any other game. Like, I'm playing this game and I'm thinking to myself, damn, this really is what Dragon Age Origins should have been in a lot of ways, like in terms of character control, getting to know the characters, exploration, all that kind of stuff. Or it really feels, the best way probably I would describe this game, it feels like the proper successor to something like Dragon Age Origins in terms of exploration, getting to know characters, seeing what's around the world, the complexities of the world, the moral dilemmas that are present in the world. It is interesting to think of the fact that every single companion that you do have in the game is one that you can choose or not to recruit. You can choose not to recruit them. You can choose to kill all of them if you so desire. Or you can choose to kill some of them or ignore them, send them on their way. And while that obviously will have gameplay ramifications and story ramifications, it is a choice. You're not forced to have this party with you, like something we've seen in BioWare games as well. Like, oh, you have to get at least some of these companions, right? No, you don't have to. In fact, the game even provides you a method for filling your party with generic characters if you just, because you do need a party to get anything done in the game. But the story companions, the origin companions, you are not forced to interact with them unless you decide to. And those kind of choices and consequences, it might seem like a small thing, because I'm sure the vast majority of players will probably end up recruiting these companions, but it might seem like a small thing, but it actually ends up feeling fairly meaningful, that you can decide not to care. Like, you don't have to be everyone's babysitter if you decide not to. You can play through the entire game and, well, kill everyone if you, so as I imagine a good amount of people, you can decide to kill a bunch of them. Which is something that is fairly rare, and the way they handled those choices and consequences, I'd say, is probably one of the better aspects, one of the far better aspects of the title. The music is great, the graphics are good, and the exploration aspect is fantastic. Are there any issues? I would argue there are. Significant ones at that. And one of the reasons I wasn't too excited about this game before it came out, the gameplay balance leaves a lot to be desired. Just to give you an idea, you might go from one area where you have a combat encounter which you just completely destroy with ease, and then a couple of meters away you have a combat encounter that's going to annihilate you with ease. And that is one of my problems with Larian in particular, because this is not the first time they've done this. I've seen it in virtually all the games that they've done, is this kind of imbalance in terms of the gameplay. It is something that is a significant drawback as I see it. Like, yes, I do play on the highest difficulty. The reason I play on the highest difficulty is I don't enjoy just steamrolling through every game. But I think a great game is the kind of game that balances it out. This is an issue with RPGs of this nature in general. It's not just an issue with Larian, to be clear. I can look back at Dragon Age Origins and how that handled it, or Knights of the Republic, or many other games and how they handled that. Like, the imbalance is certainly there in terms of the gameplay, and like the imbalance of combat encounters. Like, you have an entire area that's Act 1, people are going to be low level, and yet you throw combat encounters that are so very, very different. And not optional ones. You're not like picking a fight with the town guards or something like that where you might justify having something very difficult. No, you have, these are mandatory encounters in a way. Like, these are always going to be hostile, and yet they end up being such brutal encounters that they'll completely wipe the floor with you if you're not careful. You can cheese it, but I think like this game, like when it comes to dealing with this game, you're either going to have to figure out every stat and the most optimal way of building every character, or you're probably going to have to save and reload. I think the developers certainly expected people to do that. But it is infuriating to see that kind of imbalance in terms of combat encounters. And I do suspect that as I play more through the game, as I level up, as I get more weapons and armor, it's probably going to be better. Because one of the other things to talk about RPGs like this, it's always the early part that's a brutal one, right? It's always the early game sections that are the most brutal, and then it becomes easier. So that's one of the things I heavily dislike about this game. I've seen it all the way since Knights of the Republic 1. That was certainly the case there, or Knights of the Republic 2. Could we just have RPGs that are more balanced in this respect as opposed to this nonsense? Apparently not. I would like to see more of that kind of balance. Like, there have been, like, Elden Ring did a great job, I would argue. Sure, different type of game, but it is infuriating to have to deal with something like this. But really, outside of that, I'm not really a turn-based player, but I did find the way that they handled the combat, like the principles of combat from a turn-based perspective, to be quite good. Also, fun fact, I've played... Over the last couple of months, I've played a number of games that were stealth strategy games, really, where playing the stealth aspect was a very important aspect of it. I'm thinking of Alien's Dark Descent and Jagged Alliance 3. Like, playing stealth there properly is important, but the stealth mechanics are terrible. Stealth is still very important in Baldur's Gate 3 because it can give you a jump on the enemy, but how it's handled, like, you can split your party in multiple different groups, you can have everyone do their own thing, sneak around, get the jump on someone, even go back in stealth while you're in the middle of a combat encounter with certain characters that have that ability and really get an advantage in it. So while stealth is very important in this title isn't the frustrating mess that it could be in something like Alien Dark Descent or in Jagged Alliance 3. So that is a major plus from my perspective. But yeah, the balancing of various encounters, even from the very early sections of the game, is an issue, but honestly the only big issue that I've seen with this game so far. So is it the best game that has ever been made? Probably not. It does have its problems, but it is a game that gets its hooks in you and keeps you playing, and you want to keep going back for more and more and more. Hell, the music alone would make this game worth playing to just experience that. But you have the music, you have the characters, you have the stories of those characters, you have the main story, you have the exploration aspect. There's a lot on offer, and I would very strongly recommend picking this game up. So it certainly is a game that has delivered on the hype that was built around it, and then some. It is the best game Larian has made, and it's one of the best RPGs, at least so far, that I have played for quite a very, very long time. And it should certainly become a standard that other developers should try and reach. Whether or not they can succeed in that, that's a different discussion, because this game did have a very long development cycle, did have a huge budget. You can't expect every game to reach these kind of heights, but you look at a game like Mass Effect Andromeda, that had a pretty big budget, and it failed completely and utterly. It depends on what the developer focuses on. And speaking about Mass Effect Andromeda, you want to see a comparison? Like, you look at Mass Effect Andromeda, you see, oh, look at me, I'm a character and I'm gay or lesbian. Oh, I'm a character and I'm trans. And it's like, okay, then it's rubbish the way they handle that. Whereas Baldur's Gate 3 meets the quote-unquote diversity quota, if you want to call it that, but does so in a much better way. The way a lot of RPGs have been handled, especially by AAA developers, has been pretty bad. And it's not just Baldur's Gate 3, by the way, that's going to set the standard. You look at Elden Ring, you look at God of War, but especially Elden Ring, and you certainly see games that have pushed things forward as opposed to being a devolution. And they have been an actual evolution. Like, it feels with Baldur's Gate 3 like I'm finally playing the sequel that I've wanted for years to Dragon Age Origins. And that's saying a lot. Costin here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.